Great, and welcome to another session, but this time we're going to talk about facilitating perpetual change. Not facilitating or managing the change, because change, it's an ongoing process. So what are we saying? We're living in a world that we need to learn some fundamental principles. You need to understand where you are. You need to understand where do you want to be. And then you need to have the right interventions. But then finally, if you're serious about facilitating perpetual change, how do you execute? How do you make sure that these type of things really going to happen? Because in life, we are going through different phases, like success on the one hand, or maybe failures, or sometimes, you struggle. So how do we work through all these phases? But I want to start by thinking about the following a lot of statements. When life squeezes you, in other words, what comes out? Now think about it in terms of your character. What do we see? Do we see humility or do we see pride? In terms of the future, what do you see? Do you see hope or despair, or do you see optimism? Your actions, is it going to be yourself, or is it going to be focused on other? Your concerns and your attitudes, are you a burden, or life is a burden, or become a burden? So, it all depends on how do you see life. Or your opportunities, is it going to be sometimes a positive outcome, or is it just obstacles? So what are we saying? When life squeezes you, it's a great opportunity to facilitate change. So we're talking about your focus, your drive, your relationships, your emotions. Is it there or is it anger or blame, or is it grace and acceptance? And it depends also who's on the throne. What do you see? Who's the master of your life? Now today I want to train to you in a technique, we call it the KP. For those of you, who are familiar with Cape Town, it's not the KP model, but we call it the KP. C for contracting, A for assessment, P for planning, I for implementation, and then finally E for evaluation. So what are we saying? If you think about change, the first thing that we need to do is to create dissatisfaction with the status quo. A lot of people say, no, don't start, don't change. I'm saying this is what we need. We need to create dissatisfaction. In other words, we cannot carry on the way that we've done it. What can we do differently? Why? Because we are prisoners of the past. We don't like change. So we need to challenge people. Are you still on the right track? Are you still busy doing the right type of things? Though that's a fundamental principle. And then we must always realize change takes time. A lot of people looking for quick fixes. How can we fix this and fix this and fix this? And I'm saying it's going to take time. And then when there's a turbulent time around us, always keep in mind there's lots of uncertainty. But if you do nothing, that's going to cause stagnation. A lot of people say, well, let's just ignore it and ignore it and ignore it. I'm saying no. And what I've realized, organizations as well as individuals are change averse. Please, we don't want change. This is the way we want to do it. And one thing that I've learned, we all resist change, but we cannot afford to stand still. And there's a law of human nature. Once your mind is stretched to a new idea, it cannot always, you cannot go back to the previous situation. So let's look at things, what we can do differently. Now, if it's an organization, we normally start asking yourself, or can you ask yourself those questions? Let's talk about vision and mission and values and objectives and actions. And that to me is always a starting point when we work with individuals. But as I explained to you, if you want to understand the change management process, start creating even discomfort. Start thinking about the future. Start looking at the benefits. Start explaining the journey. Say, well, listen, what if we keep on doing nothing? What if we do this? What can we do about this? So that's the first phase if you want to implement change. But then there's an actual transformation process where you suddenly realize we cannot only talk, we need to do something, we need to talk about the expectations, but then we need to do what we call prepare for the reality. This is what's going to be different. This is how we see it. This is what we're going to do. And then finally, there's a process called continuous improvement cycle. It's got to be a continuous process, because if we implement change and we don't maintain and sustain it and all these type of things, or we don't even measure it, we're going to go back to our previous dimension. So change management, as I explained to you, let's talk about facilitating perpetual change. And it's all about where you are right now. Where do you want to be? Where do you see yourself? What do we need to do? How can we close the gap? So a key thing. So let's start talking about the contracting phase, the CAPI. The contracting phase is you realize something is missing, I'm not sure what, but there's this feeling that we need to fix it. We need to sort things out. You are not on the right track. Maybe in the organization, it could be productivity. There's something wrong with the structures and all these type of things. I'm always saying there's a change-resistant organization. But in other words, you realize, there's a gap, and the gap is growing and growing and growing and growing. But we're not closing it, and that's very dangerous. And then there's the next one is the change-sensitive organization. How do you eat an elephant? It's easy. Start with small chunks and small chunks. So what is the one thing that you want to do differently this year, this month, in your church, in your communities? And then always, and this is to me very important, when you go from the old to the new, when you implement change, there's always a crazy time. And we can minimize these type of things, and I'm going to give you a specific process right towards the end. We call it ADAPT, A-D-A-P-T. How can we adapt? I know you will find it very interesting, but wait, because that's going to be the final message for you in this short presentation. So implementing change, look at where you are, look at where you want to be, what is the present state, where do you see the future, and how do we close the gap from the old to the new. And I know there's always, when you implement change, there's confusion, there's people holding on to the past, there's distrust, there's difficulty, but that's where we need to start working through. How can we implement change? So look at these models, but then also, as I'm going to ask you lots of questions, look at where you can start. So let's think about the leader when it's a crisis. You realize something needs to change. Now I'm going to give you 6 powerful steps for leaders who are in a crisis. The first one is you as the leader must set the tone. In other words, you realize something is wrong, there's something missing, and people like to follow someone, so you need to set the tone. The second one is we're talking about connecting with people. And here is where you need to demonstrate empathy. In other words, this is not an easy one. We want to downsize, right size, we want to do this, and we all want to do this. How do you connect with people? And then very important, focus, 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 focus. So that's the first 3 things. The next, number 4 is how do you plan and decide? Because there's lots of uncertainty. And then how are you going to work in teams? And then finally, what is going to be your final processes? Brilliant technique, something that you can apply over and over and over again. But then there's the second phase, the assessment phase. Remember, A is for assessment. You cannot do any, implementation if you don't know what the real issues. And the real issues is that you know where you are, you know what's wrong. So you can measure things in your organization, the productivity, the performance, you name it. But always keep in mind, and I call it, there's lots of people, we call them, they are the innovators. It's about 2.5%. They love what you're doing. But then there's the early adapters and the early majority. You will always find what we call the laggards. Those you guys said, over my dead body, we're not going to implement this. And I want to use a simple illustration and listen to the words. And this is something powerful. Just listen to the statement. I don't want to give it too quickly away, but listen to this sentence here. My intention is not to put undue pressure on you. The cock said as he showed his hens an ostrich egg. Now remember, you look at the picture. There's the ostrich egg and the hens and specifically the cock. And then what was the feedback? I merely want to show you what's being done elsewhere. So we created a lot of pressure to the head. So, well, listen, yes, I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but this is often when we're talking about change. What do people see? What do they see? And that's the assessment phase. And then we move on to the planning phase. Planning phase is what are we going to do? How are we going to close the gap? We realize there's a performance gap or there's resources, there's a gap, there's something we need to plan. But the next phase is then the implementation phase. In other words, you've done it, you know exactly what to do, and you want to start implementing it. You cannot stand still and not implementing this. A lot of people are excited about the planning phase, but about the implementation phase, that's where they sometimes lack and they don't have all the right type of things to do. And with implementation, you normally ask 4 or 5 questions. Questions like, what should we do more of? What should we do less of? What should we do differently? What should we do faster? And what should we do better? Just fundamental questions, but that's during the implementation stage. But then I want to say something, and listen to this, the next statement. You can have the best vision in the world, and you can have all action steps, but there must be pressure for change. So what are we saying? If you don't have the vision, you're going to plot. If you don't have actionable steps, you're going to mark time. And if you don't have the pressure, it's going to be dust gathering. So you need all 3 to facilitate the change. Because when you implement change, there's a lot of enthusiasm. But sometimes there's disillusionment and panic, and they start looking for the guilty, specifically towards the end of this process. And that's why even if you implement change, you're going through things like denial and anger and bargaining and depression and acceptance. A powerful theory, but that's about successful implementation and what are the key things. But the final step is always about evaluation, because I don't want you to feel comfortable that you want to stay there. So in evaluation, you start looking at, listen, where are we right now? What can we do differently? What do we need to fix? What is the missing part? And how can we make sure? And we use a technique called stop, think, act, and review. And it's an ongoing process. Let's stop, let's think, let's act and review, so that you don't make the same mistakes when you do this assessment again in the future. So we're talking about the CAPIE model, C-A-P-I-E. Powerful, use it, doesn't matter where you are, and this is a fundamental process. But as I promise you, I want to close with specifically adapt. What is adapt all about? Because we sometimes, when we work in organizations, it's easy to see the things that's wrong. But how do we adapt? And let me use my example. Just looking at this, if I'm asking you, what do you think of the following example? 1 + 1 is 2, and 2 + 2 is 4, and 3 + 3 is 7, and 4 + 4 is 8, and 5 + 5 is 10. I immediately get the feedback, listen, Mario, 3 + 3 is not 8, or is not 7, it must be 6. But in implementing change, we often look for what is wrong. What about the other 4? How do we need to realize that there are a couple of things that we're also doing right? So let's close the session with adapt. A-D-A-P-T. Adapt means Isaiah 60, arise and shine to the new reality. I want you, this is facilitating change. For your light has come, for behold, the darkness shall cover the earth. So we're talking about adapt. It's time for us to arise. Then the D is standing for determined to push beyond the ordinary. That's in Joshua 1 verses 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and good courage. Do not be afraid. Specifically when you want to implement change, a key thought. Then ADA, align to your God-given purpose. Because where are you? Where are you on earth? And you can study Jeremiah 1 and 4 and 1 and 5. Then the word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctify you. So this is such fundamental principles for us in implementing change. But the ADAP stands for perseverance, the key for maturity, for implementing change, for development. And again, looking at James 1 and 2, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. It is vital for us when we implement change that we keep that in mind. And then finally, the T stands for, yes, tenacity. Romans 12:10, be kindly affectionate to one another with love, in honor giving preference to one another. So this is what I'm saying, ADAPT, implement this. And I want to give you a final thought, and listen to the words as in Isaiah 45 verse 3. I will give you hidden treasures, if you're struggling about change, from dark concealed places, and wealth waiting in secret sites, so that you recognize me, for it's Yahweh, the God of Israel, who calls you by your name. And that's what is it all about, implementing change like never before. I know you can do it. Don't be afraid about it. Be, somebody who's looking for change and implement it, and you can make a difference. God bless you.